Welcome to Hebrew Bible Insights. Excited that you're joining us on this YouTube video. This is the first one of a type of video that I'm really excited about. And it'll be fun testing out what are the best ways to do this. And so if there's any feedback you have, please give it in the comment section. Would love to see what type of things that you like, what things you want. But there's a resource that I find it's hard to find, which is basically people reading through the actual Hebrew text of the Hebrew Bible and giving analysis to it. And while you have, of course, great commentaries and where people are, of course, reading the Hebrew text and giving great insight on it, it's hard to find that content where it's like an emphasis on the reading of the Hebrew text. Now, for those that are learning Hebrew, there are a lot of resources to learn the grammar and vocabulary. There's some great resources like Daily Dose of Hebrew that you can get a video every day of teaching you the grammar, the parsing, the vocabulary of individual verses. What I want to do here is I want to read enough of a section where we've in essence read at least part of a poem, part of a story, and where we're going to still talk about the story, talk about the poem, and still analyze the Hebrew of it. And so for this type of video, I imagine anyone that you wanted just a deeper understanding of the Hebrew Bible and have no knowledge of Hebrew, fantastic, right? I think this will be a great video for you. Or for those of you that maybe are learning Hebrew or know someone who is, that this can be a resource that regardless of your level, you'll be able to see, here's the reason why you're learning Hebrew. It's to be able to read the actual text. And so I have Jonathan with me today. Really excited to have him on. I've had him on the podcast, have him on the YouTube channel now. He's done a lot of biblical language study. And so we're just going to have a conversation. We're going to read through the text, and you'll be able to see, I pulled it up on my computer so that way, although I prefer to read out of my physical Hebrew Bible, I have this on here so that way you can follow along and I can emphasize and point out some things. Jonathan, you have any thoughts before we start?
I'm excited. I've been reading a lot more of the Hebrew Bible the past month or so since I've graduated, and I've loved doing it with Matthew. We've actually met to do this stuff before, so I'm glad we can actually share what we've done in our private time together with people that will appreciate it and benefit from it.
Absolutely.
So
I feel the exact same.
Yeah, language is my passion. I share that with Matthew, so I'm excited for what we discover today.
It's going to be great. So again, I'm not going to parse verbs or decline nouns and talk about those type of things. That's important for language learning, but there are already great resources for that. We want to emphasize the story, the flow of thought, and talk about where the Hebrew impacts our understanding of things. And also, you'll get a chance to hear the Hebrew Bible, how it's and what it's like to hear it. So, a quick note on biblical Hebrew: there are different theories on how this language was pronounced. Multiple thousand years ago. I use modern Hebrew pronunciation. I learned modern Hebrew before I did biblical, and so I use modern pronunciation. And Jonathan uses one of the ways that biblical Hebrew is sometimes taught. So there are a few different ways. Modern Hebrew is how some do it. There are a few different biblical ones, so you'll hear some different pronunciations. So anyhow, let's go ahead and dive in. We're in Psalm 32. This is a really great poem that I find absolutely fantastic. I find that the way it opens is even a little shocking, and the way that it begins. And so I'm excited for us to dive into this. So I'm going to read just a little bit at a time. I've highlighted the word Selah here, which you notice in English is not translated because we have a hard time knowing exactly what it means. I'm convinced in this poem that this word is dividing the major sections of this poem. So I think that's one important thing to keep in mind. So I'm just going to read from the beginning to the first Selah. We'll stop there and we'll explain some things, okay? For this video, I decided to also have the English over here on this side for you to be able to follow along there. Okay, this is the ESV. So here we go. LeDavid Maskil Ashrei Nesui Pesha Kesui Chata'a אשרי אדם לא יחשוב אדוני לו עוון, ואין ברוחו רמיה. כי החרשתי בלו עצמי, בשאגתי כל היום. כי יומם ולילה תכבד עלי ידיך, נהפך לשדי בחרבוני קיץ. Selah. So, all right, let's just briefly what's going on. We have the introduction, right, attributed to David as a maskil. And here we have the word ashrei, important Hebrew word. This appears throughout the Hebrew Bible, appears in Deuteronomy, but it appears pretty commonly, a few times, I should say, in the Psalms and the Proverbs. Pop quiz, Jonathan, do you know what I would say probably the most famous psalm that begins with the word ashrei? Do you have any guess?
Psalm 1?
Psalm 1. The very first psalm begins as ashrei. Blessed is the one who, or happy is the one who. It's technically not the Hebrew word that we get blessed from commonly. It's that would be barach.
Yeah.
But it's a related word. This is to be ashrei is something you want to be, right? This leaves you in a good state. Okay, so I don't want to get too emphatic on an emotional state, but I wouldn't be surprised if it contains that. It's just whatever state you're in. This is the position you want to be in. So you're happy, you're blessed, things are good. So it's presenting a good situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So just, I know we're already pausing here, but I think it's worth mentioning. I know you can see the English, but pretend you can't. How would we as a modern culture, if we were writing a poem that started with happy is the one who, how would we finish that sentence? What ways would we describe things? And I want to be clear, I'm not trying to bash our modern culture. I just want to start a conversation. What things would we say? Jonathan, do you have any idea? Like, what do you think? Just
well, for me, it'd be more like happy is the guy who has steak and potatoes and all the Chick-fil-A he wants. And, for me, it'd probably be food and nice comfort things, whether it's like, be able to sleep in on a Saturday and go on trips or have plenty of money, or I don't know, just like any kind of probably material thing, honestly, that would make you comforted, make you happy, make you provided for, or even just, I don't know, having something, I guess.
Oh yeah, I'd relate. I mean, we're about to go eat some great pizza after we finish this recording.
I'm excited about it.
Blessed is the one who eats great pizza. Blessed is the one who gets to take a great vacation. Happy is the person who gets to do something fun. Obviously, we can get a little deeper too. Like I would say, for a lot of people, it's happy is the one who has a really fulfilling job.
True.
Happy is the one who, has a boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yeah.
Happy is the one who, has a family without strife. Happy is the one who found their meaning within. Right? There are all sorts of things I feel like our culture would say, yeah, these are ways to describe happiness. So obviously I can't give all the answers. I'd be curious in the comment section. How would you say that your culture, right? No matter where you're from, whatever city or country in the world, what are some ways that your culture would say, this is how we describe a happy person? And it's obviously interesting to compare our culture to a biblical culture and see where are the differences. And it can create some interesting conversation. So I'm going to speak at least for American culture, right? That's what I can speak from. And I'm going to say that this poem is a kind of a shocker. This poem, it really, what it says is happy is pretty intense, and it's not something I think American culture would like to say. Ashrei, what we have is here, nesui pesha and kisui chata'a. You hear the words sound very similar. It's literally what we have is, Ashrei is the one who is lifted up of rebellion or transgression, something like that, and the one whose sin is covered. Okay, so this is where you have in Hebrew two of the ways to describe forgiveness of sin is to say that your sin is lifted or that your sin is covered. They basically mean about the same thing. And what I love about the Hebrew people is how concrete they are, even when they talk about abstract ideas. And so what you have is to have something lifted off of you, the idea is that you have a burden on you that needs to be lifted up. And I know for me, sin, brokenness in my life often does feel like a burden. It feels like something, I just get it off of me. For any of you football fans, Steve Young, famous quarterback for the 49ers. I don't know if I don't know how into football are you? Of course, huge, right? Big Dallas Cowboy fan.
Sure, yeah.
Do you know who Steve Young is?
Yeah, quarterback,
Okay.
49ers.
Yep. And of course, before him was
Joe Montana.
And following in Joe Montana's footsteps. Gosh. I mean, how difficult would that be? intense. Joe Montana, until recently, he was considered the greatest quarterback of all time. Now Tom Brady, I feel like it's hard to debate that at this point.
Yeah, probably Tom Brady, but
It's still close at least. And for Steve Young, winning that first championship after Joe Montana was a big deal. And there's a famous footage of whenever they won the Super Bowl, he told someone, "Go ahead, someone take the monkey off my back," right? And he bent over, and someone went and they pretended to get a monkey and just ripped and just took it off of his jersey, right? That's obviously kind of a fun example, but he felt a burden on himself until he won that championship. And I think often that whenever we sin, we feel a burden. There's a burden that's there.
yeah, it's a good point.
Okay, so that's the first verse. Do you have any thoughts on that? On this
No,
verse?
I mean, you brought that out beautifully. Definitely, I was going to comment too how it is like there is something placed on you physically. So I love, like you said, the concreteness that Hebrew has. It doesn't always come through in the English. We always translate it metaphorically, but there is like this sense of a weight, something placed on you that is then lifted off. So thank you for bringing that out.
In fact, I just realized this now. I didn't think about this in English. Of course, that's what they say is one whose transgression is forgiven, right? And so we don't see the lifted up part. So that's the idea. It's whose one of sin is forgiven. But yeah, we missed the concreteness. So let's address this. I think as Christians, sometimes we read the Bible and we forget to read it like a normal person. I feel like sometimes we get in a certain mode. We read with monotone voices. We get really official and holy, and we just forget to just read it. Realize how offensive that line is. Blessed is the one whose sin is forgiven. So here's what that is admitting. That is admitting two things that I can at least speak for Americans, and I think for us in general, we don't want to admit. First is this: I have a sin problem.
True.
Now, sin at this point in America, sin is like a religious word. We don't use that word in non-religious context. So to use a different word would be this, right? I have done something wrong. I've done something that's so wrong that it's not just a mistake. Okay? That's how I would say it. I have done something very wrong that wasn't a mistake. And it was so significant that it created a problem. That's what that's admitting. And I think for a lot of people, we don't want to admit that. We want to think, no, there isn't wrong that I've done. Maybe I've made some mistakes, but hey, I have no regrets. It's very common, I think, for people to say, oh, I live a life, no regrets. I wouldn't change anything. Really? I don't know about you, but me, gosh, there are definitely things I would like to change.
Yeah.
There are things I've done wrong. Here's the second thing that this also admits, though, is to say that the thing that I've done that's wrong needs to be fixed. And as we'll find even more clearly in verse 2, but I can't fix that problem. Because at least if I were to admit, yes, I've messed up in a significant way, we'd at least say this: yeah, I've messed up, but I can fix it. I just, you know what? I just didn't know who I was. I'm going to find my truth now, right? I'm going to search within myself. I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to overcome. What this person says here is this: blessed is the one whose sin is forgiven.
Yeah.
And we'll just go ahead and finish up this thought here. This next one is, he says once again, Ashrei, happy or blessed is Adam. We'll come back to that. The person who God does not consider. Okay, he doesn't count against him, if you will. Doesn't consider for him iniquity. Again, another synonym for sin. So what's going on here are a few important things. One is the word Adam. Often it's translated as man. And in modern English, there's a little bit of a problem here. We think of man as male. Okay, yeah. Adam, it means human, person.
Yeah, it's humanity.
Yeah. So just realize this isn't a gender-specific thing. That this is pronounced Adonai. That's not literally how it looks in Hebrew. It's just the ancient Hebrew people decided to, at some point in their history, they decided we don't want to say his name out of respect. And so they use a different placeholder word, which means Lord. That the Lord does not count against him as sin. So another thing is this is making the statement that the thing that I've done that's very wrong is not just something that is against myself or society, but is firstly against God. And so it's a situation that requires God here. So that's some of the stuff that I see in in this first line that these first couple lines that I find.
One thing I could say too is noticing on the first verse, these two verbs, they're passive participles. So, like you pointed out, it's not us doing the lifting off ourselves. It's not us covering it ourselves. Our transgressions has been lifted off of us. Our sin has been covered.
Yep.
And the next verse makes it clear who is the person doing it. It's the Lord that is lifting it off. It's the Lord
That's good.
that is covering it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, here's the passive ones he's pointing out here and here. In English, we generally put the word is or was, maybe if it's past tense, right? And then something is forgiven, is covered. And so it's the passive idea, which meaning that it's not emphasizing our role in it. It's emphasizing someone else is doing the action.
Yeah.
Really good. And that becomes very important later. All right, so let's do this. This last part of verses 1 through 2, I think to me, when I first read this stood out to me like, wait a second, did the author, like, did he take a step to the side? Where we have ve'ein berocho remiyah. So and there is not in his spirit deceit.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, what's going on here? I don't know if when you read this, did you have any thoughts about this portion?
Well, honestly, this kind of recalled in me some of the stories of deception in other parts of the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
Like, who is it? Is it Isaac? Kind of like there's a whole deception story between
with Jacob
and Esau, with Isaac.
Yep.
Jacob goes off and is deceived, and then all those stories. So I kind of recall some of those other things, or even the serpent, if we want to go back to Genesis 3.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd be interested to see if it's the same word, if that word for deception is used elsewhere in Genesis.
Yes.
Or maybe these other narratives.
In fact, that's a great way of studying the Bible is when we come across these words in Hebrew, oftentimes there are a number of words that convey certain ideas, but it's not always the same Hebrew word behind the English. And then you can see, how is this word used? Would ancient Hebrew readers have hyperlinked this to think about, oh, there's this story that I'm thinking about. There's this poem that would have come to my mind. I think something that's important here is this. When I think about deceit, I think about John. And John says in 1 John 1:8, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. And so I don't think that the author here is emphasizing one specific sin out of many. Mm-hmm. I think what he's saying is this. The first objection that someone would have to this whole sentence here about blessed the one whose sin is forgiven is this: I don't have sin.
Yeah.
I don't have a sin problem.
Yeah.
That's the first objection. And so John, he addresses it very clearly in his letter called 1 John, where he says, if you say you have no sin, you are deceiving yourself. And so I think that's what this author is getting at.
Yeah, like you said earlier, it's just even admitting or recognizing that there is a sin problem. Yeah. Recognizing that you need the Lord to do it. You can't do it yourself.
Yep.
You can't cover it up yourself. You have to bring it to God. So that's definitely a good part of the deceit there.
So let's do this. Let's go ahead and wrap up by going through these next two verses. We'll go through these a little more quickly. I think these are a little easier to follow, although there's some rare Hebrew. So here's where we have the word key. So this can mean for, or it can mean when. In English here, ESV, they do it as both. Okay? For when I was silent, we have my bones balu. So we have this as like a withering away, a wasting away, something like this, right? In my groaning all the day. So to me, this resonates for me, right? Let's think about whenever we think of the moments, obviously our lives can be sprinkled with misdeeds throughout our life. But think about moments of particular negative actions we've done. And I don't know about you guys, but whenever you're at home alone, right? Maybe you're at college in your dorm room, or you're in your bed, or you're just in your car driving and you're alone and you're silent. Man, it eats away at you. It just eats, at least for me, I can speak for myself, it eats away at me. And just down to the core, right? All the way to the bones. I just feel that burden and weight of that sin that was alluded to earlier. And this author who's saying, he's relating, saying, hey, I know what it's like to experience the feeling of sin that is not yet forgiven.
Yeah.
And it feels terrible.
Yeah. I'm not a scientist, but I'd be curious to see even how just guilt can manifest itself physically in a person's body, like mentally, physically. Stress definitely does. You can see scientifically affect the way our chemistry works. So I don't know if the author necessarily thinking of that literally, but there is, once again, the physicality of Hebrew, that it is affecting not just your soul in some abstract spiritual sense, but in a very real physical body withering away, that there is a connection, a direct connection between the spiritual and the physical.
Yep, absolutely. I totally agree. And then the last line here, right, for day and night, so we have your hand here. Your hand is heavy upon me. Let's see, where do they do this in English here? Your hand was heavy upon me. We don't really know this was. I think he's actually emphasizing the present. Well, I guess he did say past here, didn't he? Echarashti. So maybe it was heavy upon me. Okay. But the thing is this, again, biblical Hebrew, the tenses aren't so concrete. So this could be something it's emphasizing the perfect aspect, like, emphasizing like I am when I am silent, or it could be when I was silent. So either way. And then he's saying something, this is a rare word here, my something, let's say. It's the way that it is, it's dried up in the heat of the summer. Nepach is a word that means to turn over, to flip over, and it can be used in a concrete sense, like to flip over a cup, or in a abstract sense, to overthrow a kingdom. And so it's the idea of this person, they feel like they've been flipped upside down, they're overturned, they're overcome, and they describe it as the way that something very fragile would feel like in the heat of the summer.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to comment too is how they use this metaphor for hand, that the Lord's hand was heavy upon me, because think about some of the other ways the hand of God has been used. It's usually in connection of turning against the enemies, or delivering the people, by an outstretched arm and a mighty hand. The Lord has rescued his people. And in this case, the hand is actually against the author. It's upon the author. And so I just found that to be very interesting. I don't know, what does that strike?
I agree. I think you're right. That's a good point, because the word for hand can be abstracted to mean power, and it's often by God's power, by God's hand. But now we find is that God's hand is upon me. This actually makes me think of Isaiah, where God talks about returning to Israel, who's been very wicked, and he's basically going to put them in the fire like you would a piece of metal, and he's going to purify them. So yeah, I think it's something where it's not a desired state to be in. Unfortunately, it's something we do find ourselves in, but you find the same hand that provides for you.
And it is interesting to note, you brought up Isaiah, that when we think of the hand of God being on us, we think of doing miracles or all this great thing. What if the hand of God coming upon you is just igniting within you repentance?
Yes.
Igniting within you an admission of sin. Yes. That it doesn't always lead to this powerful, good feeling. You have to sometimes go through that pain to get to the desired state God wants to bring you to. So it is a process.
Totally agree. I think it's the idea that, God, he loves those he disciplines. So, great point. Here we have the first word, selah, which I think here the author is using this pretty intentionally, actually, as a pausing moment. And I think it's worth mentioning where this pause is. We're left at a cliffhanger here. We were told at the beginning, blessed is the one whose sin is forgiven. But then the author describes having sinned clearly, and experiencing what it's like to not be forgiven. This isn't because God has chosen not to forgive him. All we know is that he sinned, and he's living in silence. He's living in groaning, and he's experiencing what it is to basically not have forgiveness. And we pause there. And I think that this is an emotion and a feeling that we can relate to, because man, when we live in that time of sin, it's a terrible feeling. We can try to run away from it, but it just eats away at us, ultimately day and night. I think this would be a good place for us to stop this video. I think we'll continue with it. Unfortunately, there's just so much gold to talk about. That's the first part of of Psalm 32, and another video will continue from where the cliffhanger is and see where things go from here. Any last thoughts, Jonathan?
No, I think we got it perfectly. I'm excited to continue and see where it goes.
Awesome. All right.